One night can change everything. I never thought of myself as someone who invited chaos, but maybe loneliness is just a subtle craving for disruption. I had grown so used to the quiet shape of my life that even the sound of my own footsteps seemed to echo too loudly through the house. The routines comforted me. The same teapot on the stove, the same book stacked neatly by my bed, the familiar weight of silence settling each evening when the sun dipped behind the trees. My world was small, deliberate, safe. But that evening, the boundaries of my solitude shifted in a way I didn't expect. The call came late, the kind that carries worry beneath its surface, and when I opened the door, she stood there, shoulders tense, mascara smudged at the corner of one eye. She didn't need to say anything for me to know that something inside her had snapped. I let her in, feeling a flutter of anticipation under my skin, a flicker that startled me with its sudden intensity. She moved through my entryway as if afraid she might break something, her hands pressed close to her body, her coat clinging to her like a second skin. I took in the scent of her perfume, faint and familiar, mixed now with a sharper note of sadness. There was something fragile about the way she set her bag down, her gestures tight, careful, as if trying not to leave a trace. She wandered to the kitchen and lingered by the counter while I filled the kettle, her presence filling the space in a way that was both comforting and electric. I noticed every detail, the nervous tapping of her fingers on the marble, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the faint tremor in her breath when she exhaled. I wanted to ease her pain, to offer warmth and shelter, but I realized that I needed her presence just as much as she needed refuge. The living room felt smaller with her there, the air charged with something I couldn't name. As night settled in, the ordinary world fell away. The lights cast soft pools on the floor, drawing our shadows long and close. Every mundane detail became saturated with meaning. The sound of her footsteps, the soft hiss of water in the kettle, the gentle thud as she set her mug on the table. I found myself moving in slow motion, wanting to preserve every moment, to memorize the way she sat on the edge of the couch, her knees tucked up, her face half lost in the glow from the lamp. Even the silence between us felt heavy, as if waiting for something to break. The hours blurred, folding in on themselves. I felt strangely alive, my senses sharpened, my heart skipping each time she crossed the room. When she slipped away to wash her face, I lingered in the hallway, listening to the water run, imagining the cool porcelain beneath her palms. Her vulnerability touched something deep inside me, a tenderness I thought I'd buried long ago. I wanted to protect her, but there was a selfish longing as well, a desire to keep her here, close, woven into the fabric of my evening. When she finally came to me, asking for a place to sleep, something inside me shifted. I tried to steady my breath, tried to keep my expression calm, but every nerve in my body was suddenly aware of her. I led her to my bedroom, watching as she paused at the doorway, her gaze tracing the room as if searching for reassurance. I turned down the covers, my hands unsteady, and watched her settle on the far side of the bed, curling into herself like a child seeking comfort from a nightmare. I lay beside her, my body tense, the mattress creaking softly beneath our weight. The space between us was impossibly charged. In the dark, her presence felt enormous. I could hear her breathing, slow and shallow, could sense the warmth radiating from her skin. I stared up at the ceiling, every thought splintering into sensation. The ache of loneliness that had followed me for years was suddenly transformed, replaced by something much more raw, an awareness of another body, another heart, so close I could almost feel it beating. Long after the house fell silent, I remained awake, listening to the shifting rhythms of her sleep. I let my hand rest on the pillow between us, tracing the memory of her hair spilling across the linen, and wondered how a single night could remake the shape of my world. The ordinary and the extraordinary had become indistinguishable, and as I finally closed my eyes, I knew that I would never be quite the same again. The morning arrived softly, a pale gold light seeping through the curtains and settling over everything with a kind of tentative gentleness. I awoke before her, lying still, aware of the subtle weight of her beside me. Her breathing had settled into a peaceful rhythm, her face relaxed in sleep, the tension of last night momentarily erased. I watched the slow rise and fall of her shoulders beneath the blanket, the way her hair curled against the pillow. There was something unexpectedly intimate about sharing this quiet moment, about witnessing her so unguarded, here in my private world. I slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb her, and padded into the kitchen where the cool tiles beneath my feet grounded me. As the coffee brewed, I replayed the night in my mind, searching for the meaning behind every glance, every hesitation. The house felt different now, not larger or smaller, but changed in some essential way. The familiar spaces carried her presence, woven into the air, the fabric of the couch, the brush of her sweater over the back of a chair. Every ordinary object had been touched by the previous night, quietly altered, holding traces of something new. When she finally appeared in the doorway, wrapped in my robe, hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep, I felt a flutter in my chest. I handed her a mug, our hands brushing, a shock of warmth blooming at the point of contact. The kitchen was filled with the sounds of morning, water running, spoons clinking against ceramic, the gentle murmur of a house waking up. We moved around each other quietly, instinctively aware of the new distance and closeness that had settled between us. I noticed how my gaze lingered on her, how her eyes would flick to me and then away, both of us hyper-aware of the subtle choreography of our movements. The day unfolded slowly. We found ourselves working side by side on the simple rituals of daily life, folding laundry, straightening cushions, putting dishes away. Each task felt like a new kind of dance, a careful negotiation of space and intent. Our arms brushed as we reached for the same towel, our legs bumped beneath the table, and every time our skin touched, even for a heartbeat, a pulse of electricity ran through me. There was a line now, thin and invisible, drawn somewhere between longing and restraint. I could feel it in every stolen glance, in the hesitation before a touch, in the silence that stretched just a little too long. I became acutely aware of my own body, of the way my hand shook when she laughed at something she read, of the warmth that gathered at the back of my neck when she leaned close to show me a picture on her phone. The line between us was both barrier and invitation, something to respect and something to want to cross. I found myself leaving the room only to return a few minutes later, unable to stay away, restless with the need to be near her. That afternoon, as sunlight slanted across the living room floor, I sat in the armchair reading, though I retained none of the words. She was stretched out on the couch, her bare feet tucked beneath her, absorbed in a book. I watched the way her fingers turned the pages, the gentle arch of her foot, the curve of her knee beneath the fabric of her borrowed pajamas. The air hummed with things unsaid. Every so often she would look up, eyes meeting mine for a brief, burning moment before darting away. I found myself inventing reasons to cross the room, to adjust a curtain, to pour another glass of water, just to brush past her, just to feel the static rise along my skin. As evening approached, the light grew softer, shadows lengthening along the walls. The distance between us was both impossibly wide and impossibly small. I could feel her everywhere, in the space beside me, in the memory of her breath against my shoulder in the night. We moved around each other as if tethered by a thread neither of us dared name. The line between us was trembling now, ready to break, but still holding a barrier of longing and fear that made every small touch, every shared look feel monumental. When darkness finally settled over the house, I realized that everything had changed. The line between us was no longer just the distance of a bed or a couch. It was inside me now, a dividing line between the safety of what had always been and the aching possibility of what might be. I felt myself hovering at its edge, suspended, waiting for the moment when I might finally dare to step across. Warmth moved through the day like a quiet promise, changing the atmosphere in subtle, undeniable ways. The simple routines of living together began to blur the boundaries that had seemed so fixed only yesterday. Morning drifted into afternoon as we moved through the house, each action, each gesture colored by a growing sense of anticipation. My senses felt sharpened, attuned to every detail. Her footsteps on the floorboards, the brush of her sleeve against my arm as we stood close in the kitchen, the way her laughter seemed to fill every room and linger long after she had stopped speaking. Even the air felt different, carrying the soft notes of coffee and soap and the faintest trace of her perfume. Later, as the sun shifted and cast a honeyed glow through the windows, we found ourselves sitting together on the living room rug, surrounded by half-folded laundry and cups of tea that had gone lukewarm. Our knees touched once, then again, and neither of us moved away. I felt the point of contact echo up through my body, as if every nerve had been waiting for this small permission. The warmth of her skin seeped into mine, spreading a slow, sweet ache through my chest. I reached for a fallen pillow and our hands brushed, fingers tangling for the briefest second before parting, yet the sensation lingered as if she had trailed her hand all the way down my spine. Throughout the day, these quiet, accidental touches accumulated, and with each one, the air between us grew heavier, more charged. The invisible line we had been tracing with our eyes and our movements seemed to bend and waver, pulled tighter with every passing hour. I noticed how she looked at me now, her gaze softer but more searching, as if she too was learning the shape of this new desire. When she stood behind me at the kitchen counter, her hand found my shoulder, a gentle press that sent a shiver straight to my core. I leaned back into the touch instinctively, meeting the reassurance and the intimacy it offered, the confirmation that I was not alone in wanting more. As dusk began to fall, the living room glowed with a golden hush. She curled beside me on the couch, our bodies closer than before, legs draped together under the shared blanket. I felt her warmth seep through the fabric, the steady rhythm of her breathing matching my own. I let my hand rest on her knee, at first tentative, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted imperceptibly closer, her thigh pressing softly into mine, her hand finding mine in the quiet space between us. We sat like that, skin against skin, a web of slow-burning connection winding between our bodies. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the small island of our shared warmth. Every touch, every brush of her fingers, every accidental caress became its own language, a conversation deeper than words could carry. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her fingertips lingering at my jaw, tracing the edge of my cheek, and I closed my eyes, letting the heat of that touch sink deep beneath my skin. My breath caught in my chest, heart pounding out a rhythm I could not control. The desire was gentle but insistent, rising between us like a tide, patient and unstoppable. That evening, as we readied ourselves for bed, the tension softened into something tender. I watched her move about the room, the lines of her body outlined by the dim light, the curve of her neck inviting my gaze. When she climbed into bed beside me, the space seemed to contract, pulling us together as if gravity itself had changed. Our legs brushed under the covers, and this time I let myself rest my hand on her arm, feeling the steady pulse beneath her skin. In that hush before sleep, I surrendered to the warmth, to the hope that maybe, just maybe, the longing might finally find its answer. The day faded with her body pressed close to mine, the memory of her gentle touch blooming everywhere I had ever wanted to be touched. Night fell slowly, the last golden ribbons of dusk dissolving into a soft blue hush. The house felt suspended, every corner painted with shadow and anticipation. She moved quietly through my room, her presence growing more magnetic with each silent step, as if the entire day had been building to this quiet convergence. The sheets were cool when we slipped beneath them, the world outside reduced to faint city sounds, the gentle hum of the radiator and the intimate pulse of our breathing mingling in the dark. Lying side by side, the space between us was measured in heartbeats rather than inches. I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, her breath steady and close, stirring the air against my cheek. The hush of the night wrapped itself around us, a private cocoon, and I sensed a trembling at the edge of my body, a restless energy that made my limbs heavy and light at once. I turned toward her, my movements careful, deliberate, every nerve ending awake to the possibility that the line we had guarded so long might finally dissolve. She was so close, I could feel the flutter of her lashes, the subtle movement of her body beneath the covers. My hand found her arm, fingertips skating over the smooth skin, learning the gentle curve of her shoulder, the length of her neck. Her breath grew shallower, a soft invitation, and I let my hand drift, tentative at first, then bolder, tracing the hollow at the base of her throat, the dip of her collarbone, the delicate rise of her chest beneath my palm. The fabric of her shirt slid against my hand, and I could feel the quickening of her pulse through the thin barrier. Desire moved between us, a silent current, gentle but unyielding. My lips found her shoulder, barely brushing, tasting the salt and warmth of her skin. The contact sent a shiver through me, a rush of longing so fierce and sweet it felt almost holy. She shifted closer, her thigh sliding over mine, and the world became nothing but the place where our bodies met. Every breath, every caress, every unspoken thought was amplified in the darkness, transformed into touch and sensation. I let my hands roam, mapping her body with reverence, tracing the outline of her hips, the soft swell of her stomach, the line of her waist. Her hands explored in return, unhurried and searching, stoking a fire that had been smoldering for so long it threatened to consume us both. I lost myself in the taste of her skin, the heat of her mouth, the way her body arched to meet my touch. The barriers between us melted, and there was no shame, no hesitation, only a fierce, wordless joy in the joining of bodies long starved for tenderness. I felt her fingers tighten at my back, the soft gasp she released as I kissed my way down her side, the trembling surrender of her thighs parting beneath my touch. We moved together in slow, spiraling rhythms, savoring every tremor, every sigh, every flash of pleasure. The room faded, time dissolving, until there was only now. Her body pressed against mine, her hands woven through my hair, our hearts beating a wild, erratic song. She tasted of salt and longing, her skin slick with desire, every inch of her alive beneath my mouth and hands. We drifted and returned, again and again, giving and receiving, each caress a question and an answer, a promise made and kept. When exhaustion finally softened our bodies and the storm of sensation ebbed, we lay tangled in the sheets, limbs entwined, skin still warm from each other's touch. The silence between us was different now, deep and content, filled with the secret language our bodies had spoken. I traced lazy circles on her back, letting the memory of her linger on my skin, the echo of our joining humming quietly through me. In the darkness, I pressed my face to her shoulder and let the sweetness of the night settle into my bones. I knew something irrevocable had shifted inside me, that nothing would ever return to the way it was before this night of a revelation, where longing had found its answer in the warmth and wonder of her embrace. Morning crept in gently, the first traces of light dissolving the shadows across the room. I woke slowly, as if surfacing from a dream too fragile to leave behind, wrapped in warmth and the deep quiet that follows the breaking of a long fast. Her body was still pressed against mine, her breath soft against my collarbone, our legs tangled beneath the covers in a lazy, intimate sprawl. I let myself lie there, unmoving, absorbing the simple miracle of her presence, the weight and heat of her beside me, the lingering ache of fulfillment stretching through every muscle and memory. The air held the scent of sweat, of skin, of something distinctly hers that clung to the pillow and to my hair. I became aware of every detail, the faint flush along her shoulder where my lips had wandered, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept, the imprint of my hand along the curve of her waist. My body felt marked and awake, alive in a way I hadn't remembered for years. Even my heart seemed to beat differently, less guarded, less resigned, as if some old fortress had finally given way to longing and tenderness. Time lost its urgency. I traced the outline of her back with slow, reverent fingers, memorizing the texture of her skin, the softness beneath my palm. There was a heaviness in my limbs, a sweet ache in my hips and thighs, reminders of how we had reached for each other in the dark, how she had moved against me, around me, with me. Each sensation replayed itself quietly, a memory flickering to life with every new touch, every small shift of her body against mine. I felt her stir, breath deepening, arms tightening around my waist for a moment before she rolled away, pulling the blanket with her. I watched her in the early light, the lines of her body softened by sleep, her hair falling across her cheek, lips parted just slightly as she drifted in that space between waking and dreaming. There was a vulnerability in the silence that followed, a hush that spoke of secrets shared and boundaries crossed. I slipped from the bed, careful not to disturb her, and wandered barefoot into the kitchen, still wrapped in the comfort of her touch. The house felt changed, charged with new meaning. Every surface, every corner seemed to echo with the memory of our laughter, our sighs, the fevered hush of our bodies moving together. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, a flush still coloring my skin, a softness around my eyes I had not seen in years. Making coffee, I found myself staring out the window, letting the memories of the night ripple through me. There was no certainty in what would come next, no promises spoken or decisions made, only the afterglow of connection, a quiet gratitude for the night that had unfolded, for the courage it took to reach for her, to let myself be seen and touched. When she finally entered the kitchen, still sleepy, she slipped her arms around my waist from behind, her face pressed to my shoulder. I leaned into her, closing my eyes, wishing that this moment could stretch endlessly, that the newness and tenderness would not have to yield to reality. Yet beneath the sweetness, a shadow lingered, a sense that we were standing in the delicate space after something has changed and before the consequences arrive. I wanted to believe that we could stay in this morning forever, untouched by the outside world, by regret or doubt. But I knew, even then, that nothing this bright can last without casting a shadow. I held her a little tighter, hoping the imprint of her would remain long after she was gone, that the memory of this closeness would anchor me when the loneliness returned. The day would come, with all its questions and silences, but for now, I simply breathed her in, letting the glow of the night settle gently in my bones. The day unfolded with a heaviness that clung to every moment, each hour stretching longer than the last. The sunlight was thin and pale, unable to warm the spaces where she moved in silence, gathering her things with hands that seemed unsure and distant. I watched her quietly, memorizing the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell across her face, the familiar pattern she made as she drifted from room to room. There was a tenderness in the way she handled even the smallest items, a kind of reverence for the traces of herself left behind. Her perfume still lingered on the bedsheets, her laughter echoed faintly in the hallway, but I could already feel her slipping away, each minute drawing a deeper line between us. As she packed, I wandered aimlessly through the house, my feet finding the paths we had shared, across the kitchen floor where she had stood behind me, down the hallway we had stumbled through in the dark, back to the bedroom where the imprint of her body still shaped the tangled sheets. The silence pressed in around me, dense and mournful, filled with all the words neither of us could speak. I wanted to stop her, to pull her back into the sanctuary of last night, to pretend the world outside didn't exist. But the inevitability of her leaving grew heavier with every passing minute. I stood by the window as she finished, my arms wrapped tightly around myself, watching her reflection as she checked her bag, closed her jacket, paused at the door. The moment felt suspended, stretched thin by all the things we weren't brave enough to say. My chest ached with the urge to hold her, to whisper that I wasn't ready to return to the emptiness, that her absence would settle into every corner of my home and heart like a winter chill. I watched her hesitate, one hand on the doorknob, her eyes searching the room for something she could not take with her. When the door finally closed behind her, the sound was quiet but absolute. I listened to her footsteps fading down the walk, each one pulling her farther away from me until even the echo was gone. The house seemed to exhale, a long, lonely sigh, its spaces expanding in her absence. I moved through the rooms, touching the places where she had been, longing for the warmth of her skin, the brush of her hand, the soft weight of her beside me in the night. The coffee cup she had used still sat on the table, a fragile testament to what we had shared, and I could not bring myself to wash it, as if holding on to it might keep her close for a little longer. As dusk fell, the house grew colder, the light faded, and the ache of missing her sharpened into something almost physical. I curled onto the couch, drawing my knees to my chest, letting the memory of her linger in the air, on my skin, in the trembling hush that followed her departure. I understood then that happiness could be so brief, that even a single night could leave a mark that would not fade. Loss was not loud or dramatic, but slow and silent, a gradual unraveling of closeness into emptiness. Still, as I lay alone in the quiet, I carried her within me, the memory of her touch, the echo of her laughter, the warmth of her body pressed close in the dark. The sorrow of her absence mingled with the fragile hope that I had lived and loved, if only for a moment, and that something in me had been awakened, even as I was left to face the quiet with nothing but the ache of goodbye.